We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is suggesting that police should follow up on crimes and investigate whatever next. We'll bring you the ULEZ latest. Is there maybe a way that the signs don't comply and perhaps people won't have to pay? We will get Mr. Loophole, as he's known, the lawyer, on to tell us what the answer is to that. And another big day in the channel with a couple of calm days coming up and a suggestion that maybe migrants could be tagged with GPS tracking. Do the government really mean it, or are they simply talking tough to cover up for their failure to stop the boats? All of that in just a moment, but first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Thousands of passengers are facing flight delays of up to 12 hours, despite a failure in UK air traffic control systems being fixed. National Air Traffic Services says it's identified and remedied the problem, but the knock-on effect is likely to be significant. More than 500 flights to or from the UK have been cancelled, with many more facing delays which could stretch into tomorrow. Pilots and crews are likely to run out of hours and therefore be unable to fly. Ministers are being accused of disregarding safety concerns on the Bibby Stockholm. The Fire Brigades Union sent a pre-action protocol letter to the Home Secretary, raising the possibility of legal action. The union has described the barge previously as a potential death trap. The government, which insists the vessel is safe, has until Thursday to respond to the legal letter. Police do have the resources they need to meet a government pledge to crack down on crime. And that's according to Suella Braverman, who says police have disregarded theft and burglaries for too long, despite record numbers of officers across the UK. Labour has criticised it as a staggering admission of 13 years of Tory failure. The Home Secretary, though, says the force must follow all lines of inquiry.
Police have responded positively to my challenge, my request in committing nationwide to indeed following every reasonable line of inquiry. So that now means that in the event of a car theft, phone theft, robbery, a burglary, if there's CCTV footage of an incident, if there's dash cam footage, if there's smartphone footage, GPS tracking evidence, a victim can produce evidence of an online resale of a stolen item, the police must follow up on those leads.
Police have named 2 people who died after driving into a flooded area in Liverpool. 75-year-old Elaine Marco and her 77-year-old husband Philip were both taken to hospital, where they later died. Police say they received a report of concern for a couple inside a car in Mossley Hill on Saturday. An investigation surrounding the circumstances is underway. The family say they're devastated and heartbroken. And prosecutors in Spain have launched a preliminary sexual assault investigation into the head of the country's football federation. Luis Rubiales is refusing to resign after kissing Jenny Hermoso on the lips at the Women's World Cup final, saying it was consensual, which she denies. He's since been banned by FIFA, the world governing body, for 90 days. The Spanish Federation has been holding an extraordinary meeting to discuss the crisis. This is GB News across the UK. That's it from me. Now, over to Nigel.
Well, on this Bank Holiday Monday, the big domestic story of the day is that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has said, and said it very, very clearly, Chris Philp, the Crime and Policing Minister, and I challenged senior officers to follow up on any and all evidence whenever there is a reasonable chance it could lead to them catching a criminal and solving a crime. So let's just get this straight, shall we? The Home Secretary is saying to senior police officers, if there is some evidence of somebody stealing a car or a bicycle or whatever it may be, then you really ought to follow this up. Well, have a think about this. Of car and bike thefts at the moment, only 2% of those that are pursued are actually caught and convicted. So if you want to go out and steal a car or a bike, your chances of being caught, charged and prosecuted are very, very small indeed. But in terms of the message that the Home Secretary is putting out today, I've got a bit of a question here. And whether this lies at the door of the police or the politicians, we'll debate in a moment. But why weren't they doing this before? Why were police not following up on this before? Or is this just a Home Secretary playing political games? Give me your thoughts, please. Farage at gbnews.com, because it all seems pretty odd to me. Well, joining me to discuss this is Norman Brennan, retired Metropolitan Police Officer and Director of the Law and Order Foundation, which aims to reduce crime and to support victims. Norman, if you look at the way that statement's worded, the suggestion is that Suella and her minister have talked to senior cops to say, in future, we want you to go and investigate crime. I mean, is she basically saying that the police have given up doing this?
Well, firstly, I'm here as head of Protect the Protectors, which is a national independent voice for the whole of policing, something I've held for 30 years. I'm not here on any political gambit. I'm completely independent. Let's cut to the chase. This is all nonsense. When I joined the policing in 1978, I spent 31 years. Part of my duties were to be on SHIELD, response units, CID, robbery squad, the same thing that most police officers do. All Grade 1 calls, which is an emergency 999 call, we attended. Grade 2 calls was where, for example, there was a burglary, suspects had left, weren't on the scene, no danger to the household, so they were hopefully safe while we dealt with our Grade 1 calls. When that was dealt with, or another vehicle would come along and deal with that as a Grade 2. The Grade 3 was something that could wait for 2 or 3 days, but the victim was met, spoken to, reassured, and some form of investigation was taken place. Let's go right back.
And just to stop you for a moment, did that happen in every case?
Almost every case. I recall when I was in a robbery squad, for example, every time I used to come in, early turn, late turn, whatever it was, we looked at all the robberies overnight. We then decided the junior detectives, trainee detectives, more senior detective, depending if a knife had been used, whether there was injury, on who we went. We went along, CCTV, met the victim, met the family, because often they were children or young people, so they needed a family member there. We met them, took a statement, we immediately started an investigation on every single case, unless it was absolutely nothing to go on. But we parked it because we looked at the suspects there, and at sometimes we used to arrest people. Similar, there was 4 of them, suspect was wearing a baseball bat with a number 9 on his shoulder. Let's connect that one, let's go and nick him. So getting back to my point, Nigel, 13, 14 years ago, Theresa May, Conservative Home Secretary, under David Cameron, along with Sir Tom Windsor, decided to reduce British policing by 22,000 frontline officers. If that wasn't bad enough, they then further reduced tens of thousands of backroom staff that supported frontline officers. So you had less officers doing more, less supported. And guess what happened over that 14-year period? Policing lost the streets. The Police Federation warned Theresa May, as I did, a number of other people, that you are starting what is commonly called a perfect storm, because if the police lose the streets, the public won't be reassured, the victims won't be supported, and the public will be frightened. And she accused everybody of crying wolf. Well, look who's crying now. It's victims of crime and the law-abiding public, because they don't see the police.
So it's quite ironic, isn't it, that it's a Conservative Home Secretary saying something's gone wrong here, guys. And kind of from that statement, she's putting the blame onto the police, isn't she? It's almost as if she's remonstrated with senior officers.
I could use all sorts of scenarios. It's a bit like the horses are bolted. We close the gates afterwards. We've now got to get them back. I personally warned all the chief constables and the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary at the time. I said, if you reduce policing by these numbers, you will cripple policing. And I said to them, if you cripple policing, I will see, as I left the police, because they started this just as I retired from the police after 31, where there was robust policing, unlike today where they've lost the robustness. And I said to them, you are putting policing into intensive care. You must do this, you must do that, you must get these officers back, you must make sure that
Now, they would argue, or she would argue, if she was here now, Suella Braverman, that they now have recruited another 20,000 police officers.
And in that time, the criminals have taken over the streets. There's 4,000 gangs in Britain, 200 in London, normally numbered 10 up to 90, normally around about 15 or 20. They assassinate each other, they carry knives, they go and raid shops, they frighten the public. The police have lost their robustness. They're all youngsters. We lost 9,000 police officers last year.
So the experience has gone?
The experience has gone. You've got probationers training probationers, and these officers are assaulted, abused, kicked, let down by their supervisors, who are also young. Chief constables and senior officers have whizzed up the scales so fast that they have lost the reality and the understanding of frontline policing. The public have lost the support of the police, not because the police have given up them. It's called fire brigade policing. They go from one emergency call to the next, And the caveat, what I was saying just now, I warned the government, the Home Secretary, chief constables. Policing, when I left, had gone into intensive care.
No,
it then went on to life support. And I'm telling you now, as probably one of the lead independent voices on policing, and I'm here to support no political party.
No, sure.
If I was to describe policing now, it's gone from intensive care to life support. The family are now round the bed.
Has the culture within the police force gone soft too?
Yes. Policing, you've got all these mobile phones now that every officer that makes an arrest, and I'll be quite honest with you, I arrested hundreds of people, and if it was seen on the television or on an iPhone, it would look horrible. No arrests look pleasant because there's a lot of shouting. Yeah. But what they do is they conveniently put certain bits and pieces down to give the angry narrative to those that hate the police.
And so there's no context of what's actually happened.
Absolutely. So bringing us right up to date now, we used to do what Sue Ellerman is asking us to do now. Back then, we used to do that. But the thing is, I say this, when everything becomes a priority, murder, rape, robbery, burglary, assault, domestic violence, rape, when everything becomes an emergency and a priority, nothing's a priority because you chase your tail. And when the courts fail the police, as The government has failed the police and the public have been failed and the victims are frightened. I'm afraid we've got a circle that just keeps going round and round. And all these promises, Nigel, of a crackdown today, we've heard the crackdown today, tomorrow will be forgotten. We'll be talking about some guy kissing a woman, and there's nothing to do with this country. We're not talking about the parents that are burying their children and planning funerals instead of futures. That should be front page news today about the devastation of crime and why we piddle around the circle on policing that fail the public. It will never change.
You couldn't have made the argument with more strength, experience or passion than you've just done. But however bad in life things get, there always has to be hope that we can turn things around. You say the family are gathered around the bed. Do you believe this will be turned around? Or do you believe that we will be a very different country?
If the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister having a meeting with me today, 45 years policing and law and order experience, decades, longer than some of those people have been alive. This is what we need today. We've got the 20,000 police officers back, but in that meantime, we've lost the streets. We need an additional 20,000 police officers on top of this 20. We need to flood the streets. We need to start talking to victims, talking to the old lady at the end of her gate. We need to go into shops, reassure them. We need to robustly tackle antisocial behaviour, which is out of control on our streets. If we flood the streets and get back the principles of Sir Robert Peel, the principles of proper policing, meet the public, reassure the public, meet victims, take statements, investigate crime, be visible, a visible deterrent. Do you know what? You'd start getting the lost reassurance back from the public and victims of crime.
There was a chap turned around New York back in the 1990s by following very similar policies, and I think he proved that it can be done. And it must be done, because, Norman, if it isn't, we're going to be living in a very different and a far less pleasant
But you need
country.
police chiefs with a backbone. We don't want police chiefs that are woke, weary, lost, no vision, no passion, no direction. All they're interested in doing is getting their QPMs in their knighthoods. We want robust leaderships that are prepared to take a bang on the chin when we make mistakes, and by golly, we've made mistakes. But out there are tens of thousands of men and women that risk their lives day in and day out, never mentioned by police chiefs, the Home Secretary and everyone else that wants to slag the police off. The long and the short is, let's get police back on the streets, the maximum amount of time that we can put them there, and all these police chiefs and every senior officer, until we can regain the streets, why not, for at least one weekend a month, all of those senior officers are not on anti-terrorist duties and things like that, get out in a response vehicle, get back to what basic policing was all about, and you play your part too.
And give some leadership too to the younger police officers.
Absolutely, leadership's what's paramount.
Norman Brennan, powerful stuff. Well, one challenge for the police will start at midnight tonight. Yeah, 0 hour for the ULEZ expansion comes at midnight tonight, with signs being vandalised everywhere. But a scaffolder who'd been given a huge fine for the rather more inner London LEZ zone, he's won a recent court case. In a moment, I'll have Nick Freeman, you know him, yep, Mr. Loophole, to tell me, if all the signs are illegal, do we have to pay the fines? All of that in just a couple of minutes.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, as I said, if Suella Braverman says the police should follow up on crime, I asked the question, why weren't they doing this before? One or two of your thoughts on this. Ian says, as a retired criminal investigator, I can state that I'm unimpressed by Braverman's direction that police must follow all reasonable lines of inquiry. Those very words have been taken from the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, and as such, since its enactment, have always formed a fundamental guiding principle for investigators. So yeah, basically, this exists already. All she's doing really here is reinventing the wheel and showing that we're going to get tough. Sarah says, rubbish. We had local drug dealers take a meat cleaver to our car. CCTV, eyewitness and ring camera footage. We knew the address that they went into. Police took 3.5 weeks to get in touch and didn't take a statement until then. And finally, Victor says, the fact that Braverman has to even make such a statement demonstrates the powerless nature of policing today. When I had the wheels and tyres stolen in Gerrard's Cross, the police were not interested in anything other than giving me a crime number for insurance purposes. The wheels and tyres cost in excess of £5,000. And you know, so many people, of course, who now suffer from crime, theft in particular, don't even bother to report it because they're worried what it might mean for their insurance premium. And I genuinely believe that the real crime figures are much, much higher than any official statistics. Now, a fella called Noel Wilcox. He's a scaffolder. He runs a business and he's got a yard in northwest London that is just inside the low emission zone. And clearly he was driving back and forth and incurring charges and potentially quite big fines. And he was asked for 11.5 grand. Now, he's fought this case. And the argument that he's made is that the LEZ signs and the ULEZ signs, and indeed, actually, you could apply this too to the congestion charge in central London. All they do is tell you you're going into a zone. They don't tell you what it means. They don't tell you what it would cost. I wonder whether, as 0 hour approaches for ULEZ, I wonder whether this might be a way out of people having to pay the charges and indeed pay their fines. Well, who better to join me on this, down the line from Manchester, than Nick Freeman, the lawyer, of course, famous as Mr. Loophole. So, Mr. Loophole, this guy has won his case. What does it mean?
Well, it means that the signage isn't authorised. There's been a hearing. He owed £11,500 in, I think, 7 tickets in total. He took his case to a tribunal, and the tribunal adjudicated. This was back in October 2021, so it's some time ago. He took his case and he challenged it on 2 bases. One, that the signs weren't authorised, and secondly, they provided inadequate information. And the adjudicator very fairly said to TfL, I hear these arguments. I'm going to now adjourn the case for 3 weeks for you to prove to me that these signs comply with the directions, the 2016 directions, and that they provide sufficient information. TfL didn't do anything at all. He then concluded that he could not be satisfied, number one, that the signs were authorised, and number two, that they provided sufficient information, and therefore he found in favour of the scaffolder. It wasn't him who was driving, actually, it was his various employees. But he said, we honestly just didn't know that this was a problem. We didn't know there wasn't sufficient information. So at the moment, we have this case is not binding. It's what's called persuasive. But in my view, I think he made the right decision on the right basis. This has just come to light now on the eve of ULEZ. I think it will be, if I was advising TfL, I would say, I'm going to hold an embargo right now. I'm going to do nothing, and I'm going to rectify this problem. I'm going to make sure, first of all, that the signage is authorised. And secondly, I'm going to amend the signs. I'm going to take them all down, and I'm going to make sure they're all marked with a C, which indicates it's a charging zone. And that will deal with the problem in relation to, is there sufficient information? Because every motorist doesn't need to know we're in a zone. What they want to know is, what is the consequence of entering that zone? So as the signs currently stand, number one, they're not authorised, but secondly, they don't say anything other than we're entering a zone, and that could mean a whole host of things.
Yeah, I mean,
camper, or what is it? What does it mean?
The congestion charge, the congestion charge in Central London does have that C.
Yeah.
Inside a red ringlet, but the others don't. Another thought on this, Nick. Interesting, with the exception of Slough Council, all round the outer ring of the M25, Kent, Surrey, Thurrock Council, Essex, every single one of those councils is refusing to put ULEZ signs on the edge of their boundaries to say you're entering the zone. Could this lead to further confusion?
I think it'll lead to more than confusion. I think it will lead to the unenforceability of any fines that anyone seeks to impose, that TfL seeks to impose. There has to be signs. You have to advise the motorists, number one, that there are signs which are authorised, and secondly, that you're entering a zone where you're going to be charged. And if there's no signs, no fines. That's my view.
How very, very interesting. Well, Nick, I've no doubt that Sadiq Khan and his team will ignore your advice completely and they will plough on with this beginning at midnight tonight. Although, I have to say, the area that I live in on the border, I think 90% of the signs have been vandalised already. So just a last thought on this. How much police time and resource do you think they can put into stopping people taking away the cameras?
Well, I understand in South East London, something like 90% of the signs have been vandalised. And obviously that's a serious criminal offence, and I wouldn't be advising anyone to do that. That's not the way to proceed. But we're talking about serious money. In the last 2 years, TfL have earned £320 million. Now that might be an awful lot of money to pay back. There's huge amounts at stake here, and it must be in their interest. Now they're on notice that there's a potential problem, to get their act together, to call a halt, get the signs everywhere, and make sure they provide the right information. Then they're on a much firmer wicket.
Nick Freeman, thank you very much indeed. Well, that was a legal opinion, folks. We can't guarantee you that Nick is right. We can't guarantee you that if you don't pay your £12.50 and you get a fine and you refuse to pay the fine, that it won't be possible to enforce it. So please don't take what's just been said as absolute gospel, but it is very, very interesting indeed. And by the way, there's a lot of abuse being hurled at Sadiq Khan, and I do understand why. But remember, it was Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, that proposed the ULEZ extension. You see, ultimately, in this country, there is not much to choose between those two parties. And tomorrow night, we're going to have a Farage at Large live, literally right out on the edge of Bromley Borough and Kent County Council. We're hoping it doesn't rain too much. Now, the Don't Kill Cash campaign has been very successful. Successful in the sense that the government have backed it, the government have spoken, and the government have put pressure on the FCA to say, allow people, if they've got cash, to take it out and put it in to their bank accounts. But somebody else who has been doing absolutely, I'm going to say sterling work, why not, on this, is Steve Speakman, chairman of the Manchester Civic Society, and he joins me now. Steve, you've been on this campaign for a couple of years. Tell us how it came about, please, and what you've managed to achieve.
Yeah, well, it first came to my attention with an elderly gentleman whose wife was in hospital, and he was going to hospital, Stockport, Stepping Hill, and he couldn't get a sandwich or buy a drink, and he was spending long hours there. And he came to me, and I took it up with the executive there and campaigned on the matter and said, look, you know, you're a hospital, you're a public entity. It's vital that you're available to all. And they saw the light on this. I have to say, wherever we've been, whether it's museums, hospitals, and we've been to a lot of places, the staff are always very, very positive, the staff on the ground. And they're always very keen to see the return of cash because, of course, they're the ones who have to turn people away. And when I've gone back, like take Buxton Pavilion Gardens, one of the members of staff there came out from behind the counter and shook my hand and said, oh, thank you very much for what you've done. I've had a lot of that kind of thing. We've had Manchester Museum. We've had the Whitworth Art Gallery. These are big refectories in these places, by the way. I mean, we've had the Lowry in Salford. And I've visited these people. I've spoken to the staff on the ground. I've then petitioned senior management. And generally, and across the piece, I've had very good results.
Well, I think it's absolutely brilliant, Steve, what you've been doing. I see you're having a bit of trouble with the Green King pubs.
Well, yes. We've been doing battle with Green King for some time. There are two pubs, one in Cheadle, the Ashley, and the Didsbury, a very popular pub at quite a beauty spot in Didsbury, Manchester. And they have gone cashless. Again, the staff on the ground, I've spoken to them extensively. It's not their will that this is happening. It's senior management. I've wrote to them. I've spoken to them. They've said things to me like, well, look, we're having a trial. So I've said back to them, well, what are you trialing? You know, the preclusion of people who use cash is not a very good trial. No. And, you know, I've put the campaign, I've put the ideas to them as much as I possibly can. I haven't been successful there. I'm not always successful, but I've had, you know, a good number of successes.
No, you've had some great successes. And just to make sure, Steve, that you and I are not sued by Green King, I have a statement from them. It says, we're undertaking a small trial in a number of our pubs where card payments make up more than 90% of all transaction. It's an ongoing trial. We've not made a business decision to permanently go cashless in this small number of pubs or any of our other pubs at this stage. Right, that's the Green King response. You keep the pressure up. A final quick thought, if I can, Steve, while I'm with you. Met a chap this morning, getting on in years. He said, now, when I drive to the chemist to get my prescription, I can't pay to park because I don't have a mobile phone. I've never had a mobile phone. I don't want a bleep bleep mobile phone. I'm not interested. But the local council have decided you have to have an iPhone effectively and an app. Is there anything you can do about that, Steve?
Yes, I've sat down with the chap who's in charge of digital inclusion in Manchester Town Hall, a councillor in Manchester, and I've spoken to him and a senior officer just recently. And I have to say, when I approach people in whatsoever capacity, I'm amazed that often they seem not to have, it's not crossed their mind that this will be a problem. And I've said to them, look, you know, you've got to include people. His officers had written back to him and he passed it on to me. And his officers have said not to worry. It's mainly young people that use the stacked car park. So we don't need to worry about having cash. I mean, these are amazingly poor responses. I would say in every instance, and for everybody, take it up, challenge it, because by doing that, we're getting the result.
Well, I have to say, Steve Speakman, thank you for joining us. We're absolutely attuned on this. We're going to work together, I'm sure, as the months and years go on. And well done for your truly heroic work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was pretty impressive. Nadine Dorries, yes, she's gone. Finally, she's gone. There's going to be a by-election in Mid-Beds, but not without a really, really rather unpleasant, stinging letter. Is this really bad news for the Tory party? Or is she, as some people say, just mad nad, and it doesn't matter? In a moment, I'll discuss all of this with our political editor, Chris Hope.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, the ultimate resignation took rather a long time, and she is very miffed that she hasn't gone to the House of Lords. But does this resignation letter, is it absolutely the death knell of the Conservative Party? A House divided against itself can't stand. Joining me down the line from his home in Harpenden is Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. Chris, how much damage does this do, or is it just Nadine Dorries being Nadine?
Well, it's definitely Nadine being Nadine. It was an 1,800-word letter which she published in the Mail Sunday. I'm not even clear it went to Number 10 first before it appeared. And it is brutal takedown of Rishi Sunak. It talks about how he abandoned the fundamental principles of Conservative history will not judge you kindly. I mean, it's the kind of Scouse and Nadine there telling it like it is, I suppose, to the Wickhamist, the old Wickhamist Rishi Sunak. I mean, it is brutal. It's difficult to read. I mean, people who are friends of Mr. Sunak will say, well, that's just, you know, a kind of Borisite mouthing off. And that was the reaction initially I got from MPs and ministers. One cabinet minister told me it was a flick of the dinosaur's tail. But when people have read the letter and digested it, I think it has struck some chords, and certainly some moderate Tory MPs are WhatsApping me saying, well, actually, they do agree with a lot of what Nadine had to say. So I think the Tories will be wrong to dismiss it completely as a kind of reaction of an MP who failed to be given the role in the House of Lords that she wanted from Boris Johnson.
Yeah, the one irony, Chris, that I took out of it, and I agree with you, by the way, I think it does do damage. I think it hurts Rishi. It damages his control over the parliamentary party, and it sends a terrible message out to the country at large. Because after all, much of the last 2 years, we've had to live with the constant internal battles in the party. But the one irony, I thought, is as if she's saying, well, Boris Johnson is the true Conservative, not you. Actually, socially, Rishi Sunak is far more Conservative than Boris Johnson. There were many things that Johnson did as Prime Minister that came as a complete shock to many long-standing Conservatives. And I see this, you know, maybe with Lord Cruddas and David Campbell-Bannerman and all these groups that seem to want Boris back, that actually he was more of a metropolitan Liberal apart from Brexit.
Yeah. Well, you only need to look at net migration, which went up to, I think, 600,000 at the last count on Boris Johnson's watch. And that was done with the control over our borders that was given to the government by that Brexit vote that you campaigned for, Nigel. I think if you're looking forward, though, the mid-Bedfordshire by-election is going to be fascinating. Now, of course, Nadine Dorries doesn't resign until Parliament comes back and it's submitted to the House of Commons and the Treasury acknowledge it. If there's a by-election at the beginning of October, the only one I can find of, which is a survey of mid-Bedfordshire, shows that Labour's on 28 points, the Tories on 24 points, Lib Dems 15, and Reform, this kind of right of the Tory party, moderate, it's a small party, minority parties on 10 points. Now, I would say that if Mrs. Sunak can find some form of show some leg maybe at the Tory party conference on tax cuts, that 10% of Reform could come across to the Tory party. And if the vote is split for Labour and Liberal Democrats, they could hang on to it. But I think to do that, many would say Mrs. Sunak has got to show some form of kind of old-fashioned tax-cutting policies or at least some leg on tax-cutting policies, which he's failed to do so far.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Chris, that just one statement is going to bring 10% of those who are really very, very hacked off with the Conservative Party back. Perhaps if he stopped the boats, perhaps if he reduced net migration. But frankly, there's no prospect of either of those, is there?
No, there's not, and largely because they're in the hands of the courts. The whole policy to stop the boats, which is, let's call this Rwanda policy, send people who arrive here illegally by small boats to Rwanda to be processed. That policy won't be judged by the courts until Christmas time, I understand, which means we're going to see months and months and months of difficult headlines of small boat crossings. And there's a big week last week, wasn't there? So I think it's not going to end. And the one thing they don't want to talk about much in government is the small boats policy. It's not going very well for them. And hence this week we're seeing announcements on crime and policing, and they're hoping that can put the ball back in Labour's court. But Labour is saying, well, you know, you've had 13 years of this. You know, you can't keep pointing out where it's gone wrong. You know, it's on you a bit, this now.
And the other one, of course, is 0 hour at midnight. The ULEZ extension comes in from midnight. And I made the point earlier briefly. It was Boris Johnson, as Mayor of London, that approved it. It was Sadiq Khan that enacted it, and when it went to the Department of Transport, Grant Shapps rubber-stamped it through. And now they've got Susan Hall standing for them in the mayoral contest saying, I'm against ULEZ, I'll get rid of it. Even on this, there's not great clarity, is there? Or not great difference, frankly, between the two parties.
And the extra point to that, Nigel, is that Mark Harper has not stopped it. I mean, he has got, in theory, some form of legal right to do so, as you revealed on your programme last week. He's not doing it. He's been told he can't do it by government lawyers, therefore he can't spend taxpayers' money doing something which has no prospect of success, even though it may have delayed the expansion of ULEZ to Greater London. I think in defence of Johnson, I think he would not have expanded ULEZ to all of Greater London, I think you would have kept it as an issue for the inner London, because, of course, transport links are not as good in outer London as they are in inner London. That's what, if Johnson was here, he may defend it that way.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I think it's going to be difficult. I mean, hopefully we'll be hearing from Sadiq Khan tomorrow on this channel defending it. But there's no doubt there's concern from people really in those counties abutting London. You know, if you go shopping, if you maybe go to hospital inside the South and North Circular Road, do you get charged £12.50? It seems unfair.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you'll be joining me tomorrow night in my local area where I've lived all my life, and it's the most rural part of Greater London, and you'll see for yourself what a complete and utter nonsense much of it is. Christopher Hope, thank you very much indeed. Now, the What the Farage moment. I've been in terrible trouble in the past with the national press for daring to say there's a fifth column inside the country. Terrible historical comparisons have been drawn, but try this one for size, folks. Emma Haddad is her name. She was the Home Office's Director General for Asylum until October 2022. She's now taken a job to oversee Amnesty International UK, who of course are campaigning against the government's attempts to halt channel crossings and deport migrants to Rwanda. I mean, can you believe it? Somebody that was inside the Home Office, a senior civil servant who clearly disagreed with government policy at every level, and who knows, maybe obstructed it as well. Now, the next 2 days are going to be flat calm. There'll be many, many hundreds, probably into four figures, that will cross the channel over the course of the next 2 days. But it's OK, because the government's got a new plan. They may well fit asylum seekers that cross the channel with GPS electronic tags. Are they really going to do it? We'll discuss that in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities.
especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Have a look at this TikTok video. It's taken from the cliffs of northern France, and it's really quite interesting because what you see is a trafficker watching a boat crossing the English Channel. And what this means, there he is, and he's got some super binoculars. He's looking across. You can see Dover, the harbour of Dover, and there's the dinghy. It's one of those newer kinds of dinghies. Probably up to 80 people on board. But he must be very happy because he's part of a gang. That one boat will have been worth about $2.5 million to that trafficker. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about absolutely enormous sums of money being made by the criminal gangs. And it's why, however hard we crack down on them, whatever we do, there'll always be more people to take their place. But the government say, it's okay, we're going to get tough, we're going to put GPS tags on those that arrive across the channel and who we can't house safely. A lot of this goes back to the government's Illegal Migration Act, which they seem to think gives them enormous powers. I'm not so sure that really it does. Well, joining us down the line is a friend of the programme, Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer. Ivan, is this just tough talk from a government whose policy is failing? Or is it feasible to put GPS tags on people who might actually have come, in some cases, for genuine, legitimate reasons? Does it almost, and would courts argue, this almost says you're guilty, not innocent?
Indeed, and I think you'll get lots of legal challenges. Tags are already used in the immigration system where there's a risk of somebody absconding, and they've got duties to report. Now, if somebody is a genuine asylum seeker and he or she has every reason not to abscond, especially from a country like Syria, Iran, Iraq, Eritrea, these countries where the success rate is in the 90%. Why would you want to put a tag on that individual? And it could be a breach of their physical and moral integrity under the European Convention. So there may well be legal challenges to that.
Our old friend, the European Convention, absolutely. Funny enough, I mean, Suella Braverman this morning on this point says, my personal views are known, but it's not, leaving the convention is not on our radar. So maybe yet another policy that they can't actually enforce. Isn't, Ivan, the other problem that they can simply be taken off? We showed this video earlier in the year. I'm going to show it again. And this was an Albanian. He was on bail in this country. He'd been fitted with a tag, and he simply cut it off and got rid of it. So isn't that the other problem, that even if you were to put these ankle tags on people, the seriously bad guys would just cut them off and chuck them away anyway?
That's absolutely right. And tags used currently are backed up usually by someone providing surety. So it's usually a friend or a family member, and it can run into several thousands of pounds. And if that person then absconds, then that individual loses their money. So asylum seekers won't have any sureties. So they could simply, if they're really determined to escape, to get out of the system and just abscond and become illegally in the UK, then they can simply take them off. Yeah. The cost of the tag is actually quite cheap. It works out to about £10 a day. So it's actually a cheap and effective way to monitor those who do not want to abscond, which sort of begs the question, why would you want to tag somebody who doesn't want to abscond?
Yes, as you say, you'd be tagging the wrong people, wouldn't you, really? Because, look, I don't think for a moment, Ivan, that it's actually going to happen. Just a sort of final thought on this. The Stop the Boats policy, it's not working at all, is it?
No, and what the government's hoping the courts sort of late November, early December, will overrule the High Court's decision that the policy is unlawful. Remember, this whole tagging and this whole tagging policy is because the Illegal Migration Act places a statutory duty on the government to detain and remove those seeking unauthorised entry to a safe third country. Rwanda has been deemed to be unsafe by the Court of Appeal. So if that fails, if the Supreme Court agrees with the Court of Appeal, it begs the question of they can't even enforce or uphold their duties under the Illegal Migration Act. So it would be a dead horse, basically.
Yeah, and there was a thought the other day, wasn't there, that maybe the Ascension Islands might be suitable, but I think, was that taken just to be completely ludicrous?
Again, I mean, I think the government announces policies without thinking them through, without really thinking whether they can actually implement them. And this tagging policy is the same. The Rwanda's been the same, making it illegal to arrest people when they come across the channel. That was also never implemented. So it's signs of a desperate government trying to show they're trying to do something.
On that note, Ivan Sampson, thank you very much indeed for joining us again on the programme. Thank you. Yep, none of it is going to work. And all the while, and you heard it there, didn't you? The European Convention, all the one part of that, will never solve any of it. Now, he could be luxuriating down in his beloved county of Somerset. But no, Jacob Rees-Mogg is here to present State of the Nation. Jacob, Nadine Dorries, whether you agree with her points in the letter or not, and I was debating that with Christopher Hope earlier, isn't this a sign of a party that is just incapable of healing itself?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Nadine is Nadine is a great character, and she says things in an extremely pithy manner, and she gets her point across well.
What, like you're a loser, Prime Minister?
Absolutely. But actually, I think...
But isn't that the sign of a split party?
No, it's not. Nadine ought to have got her peerage. It was deeply unfair that she didn't, that she's been a distinguished public servant, and she was in Boris Johnson's resignation honours. She should have got it. That she didn't get it was a number 10 fix, which I thought was very unfortunate. However, I think most Conservatives want to rally round the Prime Minister, want to back Sunak, because it's much better to have Rishi Sunak in office than it is to have Sir Keir Starmer, who apparently can't be called secure by socialists anymore because it makes him sound too tough.
Yeah, I know.
Such a pity, really.
I know. Well, Jacob, you're always loyal to the party line, but I think if I'm Joe Soap looking at this,
or Sir Joe Soap,
no chance of that. In my case, no, I just see a party that is constantly fighting within itself. We went through all these agonies in 2022, into 2023, and it just looks like it's still going on. ULEZ comes in at midnight.
Yeah, but I think this is the point. It's what do we actually do, not whether we like each other or not.
No, well, fine.
And ULEZ is case in point.
I know, proposed by Boris Johnson, rubber stamped by Grant Shapps. What's the difference, Jacob?
We should legislate to stop ULEZ across the country. I don't know if you've noticed, but the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, has introduced an amendment to the Levelling Up Bill. Yeah. That will make it impossible to turn it into road
They should have used their powers.
Scrap the whole thing.
Article 143, they should have used their powers. The damage will be done. Let's have a look at the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the next few days, the changeable theme will continue, most of us seeing some further rain at times, but in between there will be some sunshine. So as we end Monday, we've got this ridge of high pressure across the UK. This generally gave us a settled day today, but fronts are waiting up across the northwest, and as we go through the course of the night, we'll see one of these move into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So some showers here. For a lot of England and Wales, though, it should be largely dry, but fairly cloudy. So that will help keep most towns and cities firmly in double figures as we start Tuesday morning. So into Tuesday, we'll track this band of showery rain further southeastwards across England and Wales. Behind it, further showers moving in across parts of western Scotland. Quite blustery here too as we go through the course of the day. Probably the driest conditions down towards the southeast, but even here later on, we will see a few showers. So I think come the afternoon, possibly the best of the sunshine over towards northern England. In the sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm, most of us seeing similar temperatures to what we have seen today. Into Wednesday, I'm hopeful for a little bit more sunshine across the board, but still the risk of some showers, especially across eastern parts of Scotland down into parts of England too. But in the sunshine, it should feel fairly pleasant, but still that keen wind up across the north. Into Thursday, a band of rain moving across many southern parts of the UK, and really that's going to continue the changeable theme as we go through the course of the week.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The British Museum is in crisis as its director resigned last week amidst the biggest scandal in its history. At least 2,000 artefacts have been stolen from the collection's total of 8 million, the largest collection in the world. But could the Elgin marbles be next on the agenda? At midnight tonight, Sadiq's tyrannical Khanate will implement the ultra-low emission zone expansion. But it's been a busy couple of weeks for the Mayor's PR department as it was revealed one of his deputies pressured Imperial College London scientists to spin the narrative when research suggested ULEZ has made no discernible difference to children's health. The crusade of PC groupthink continues in the public sector. As it emerges, 77 trusts have signed up to the NHS's Rainbow Badge scheme, in which charities mark down institutions for using really shocking words such as mother or woman. Why is the NHS trying to erase women from the English language? The Home Secretary has called on the police to investigate every theft and that there's no such thing as trivial crime. It's the sort of thing you would think is self-evident, but in these times of broken Britain, in which theft has been de facto decriminalised, it seems the obvious has to be pointed out. State of the Nation starts now. Also be joined by a particularly penetrative panel this evening. GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Moylan. As always, I want to hear from you. I've been waiting to hear from you because I've been away for a fortnight. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the news of the day with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Tens of thousands of airline passengers are facing cancellations or long delays after a technical issue brought down air traffic control systems in the UK earlier. Authorities say the problem has now been fixed, but airlines are warning of a significant knock-on effect caused by the backlog of flights. More than 500 flights to or from the UK have been cancelled, with passengers being told to expect delays of up to 12 hours. The advice is only travel to the airport if your flight's confirmed as still operating. Ministers are being accused of disregarding safety concerns on the Bibby Stockholm. The Fire Brigades Union has sent a pre-action protocol letter to the Home Secretary, raising the possibility of legal action. The union has previously described the barge as a potential death trap. The government, which insists the vessel is safe, has until Thursday to reply to the legal letter. Police do have the resources they need to meet a government pledge to crack down on crime. That's according to Suella Braverman, who says police have disregarded theft and burglaries for too long, despite record numbers of officers across the UK. Labour has criticised it as a staggering admission of 13 years of Tory failure. The Home Secretary says the force must follow all lines of inquiry.
Police have responded positively to my challenge, my request in committing nationwide to indeed following every reasonable line of inquiry. So that now means that in the event of a car theft, phone theft, robbery, a burglary, if there's CCTV footage of an incident, if there's dash cam footage, if there's smartphone footage, GPS tracking evidence, a victim can produce evidence of an online resale of a stolen item, the police must follow up on those leads.
And Donald Trump's criminal trial on charges of attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election result will begin on the 4th of March next year. Trump's trial in Washington, D.C. will start one day before Super Tuesday, when many states nominate their Republican or Democratic candidate for president. He is the favourite to win the Republican nomination, and the presidential election itself will take place almost exactly 8 months later, on the 5th of November. Trump is due to appear in court in Georgia in just over a week to enter a plea in a separate criminal charge of plotting to undermine the election result in that state. Finally, prosecutors in Spain have launched a preliminary sexual assault investigation into the head of the country's football federation. Luis Rubiales is refusing to resign after kissing Jenny Hermoso on the lips at the Women's World Cup final, saying it was consensual, which she denies. He's since been banned by FIFA, the world governing body, for 90 days. The Spanish Federation has been holding an extraordinary general meeting today to discuss the crisis. Well, this is GB News, live across the UK. I'll be back with more in about an hour's time. Now, it's over to Jacob.
Well, first of all, it's a delight to be back. But while I've been estivating in Somerset, the British Museum has been engulfed in scandal. Late last week, the director of the museum, Hartwig Fischer, brought forward his resignation with immediate effect, amidst probably the greatest scandal in the museum's history. More than 2,000 artefacts have been stolen from the collection, which is supposedly the world's largest, with roughly 8 million pieces in total. And this is the problem, because the British Museum simply has too much stuff. And all the stuff it's got isn't actually properly catalogued. It doesn't know what it owns. Some of the catalogues they've been talking about in the last few days go back to 1926. Now, for me, of course, that's relatively modern, but it's almost 100 years ago. And that's the issue for the British Museum. Of these 8 million, 80,000, about 1%, are on permanent display. And so inevitably, if you haven't catalogued it correctly, if you don't know what you've got, it's only going to be a matter of time until people realise they could just walk out with some of the bits and pieces that were stored in the British Museum or had come under the ownership of the British Museum, because it's been a magpie museum that has collected and drawn in things of, quite frankly, varying quality for now well over 200 years, and it's slightly lost its sense of purpose. Museums need to be focused. They need to know what they're about, and the British Museum, when it started, was a focus of excellence, of something exciting and brilliant. And then gradually it got just to have anything that anybody felt like giving it. And it ended up with its 8 million pieces. The British Library, which used to be part of the British Museum and is now independent, separate, has a much clearer identity. It has, and gets given still, a copy of every book published in the United Kingdom. And this is a phenomenal resource. But of course, to run a library, it has to be properly catalogued, and you can become a reader at the British Library and go in and ask to borrow from this enormous range of books, and they know where they all are. And this is where the British Museum has got caught in a trap of modernity, because it spent much too much time thinking about the politics of giving away the Elgin marbles, with George Osborne sucking up to the Greeks or whatever he's doing and hoping to get a few bits and pieces in return, though I fear forgetting the wise words of Cassandra. I fear the Greeks even when they bear gifts, so I'd be a little bit careful of what's being offered, rather than focusing on the details of running a museum and understanding what it ought to have and how it ought to display it. Because if you've got 8 million items, surely you want people to see them. So why doesn't the British Museum do much, much more to share its best pieces across the country in some rural museums that may not have